Right to Remain Vocal is back with a candid conversation. Real Talks is going to present today. Uh, we're going to have Mr. AJ here today to be able to come and share his profession as being part of law enforcement and serving the community. And we're going to get a chance to just kind of recap a little bit on some of what we did last week. There was some technical difficulty last week, but we got that together, and so we're going to go ahead and push forward. Starting with, as we are finding out the results of the election finally, after about several excruciating days of waiting for many of us. I mean, we're here. What do you think about that, AJ?
It's going to be a long court battle, but I'm glad that it's over as far as we can see. I'm glad Trump's a one-term president. He was, personal opinion, wasn't good for this country, but I'm looking for closure. I'm looking for a new chapter. I'm looking to move this country forward in a positive way.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I definitely agree, and I'm ready to see what the changes that are gonna take place and see what comes next for us as a country and as our future. You know, I've been hearing so many different perspectives and just thoughts on from people who are like, wow, like now, you know, we're able to feel. I think in the video you were just playing, like the guy was just saying, like, now I'm able to tell my kids that integrity is a big reason of why you become president. I'm able to tell them, like, you know, that they can feel comfortable as a minority. And a lot of people are resonating these feelings and these thoughts. Now it's almost like this sense of relief on a perspective of America that's going on right now. As we dialogue a little bit about that, we're going to also dialogue into the whole purpose of why, you know, Real Talks was started, to talk about to really just engage the community on the topics of regarding police and law and even the police brutality that we've seen have gone on, from the likes of all the way back to Mike Brown to George Floyd, Elijah McClain, and Breonna Taylor, and so many others. And so I just want to open up the floor to really who my guest is today. So AJ, I mean, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and just tell us what you're passionate about, and you know, what are you from St. Louis? What do you like about St. Louis? Tell us about you.
So I was born and raised here in North County. Well, not here in North County, but in North County. Graduated McClure North High School. I still live in Florissant area. I went to college, got a bachelor's and master's. I'm currently enrolled and working on my doctorate in social justice. I've been a law enforcement officer for 17 years, going on my 18th year. What I'm passionate about travel. I got a tattoo or a sleeve tattoo started of travel stuff. Passionate about social justice issues, criminal justice reform, just having the big conversations to hopefully get everybody closer together, not further apart.
Thank you so much, AJ. You know, that's what it's really about, getting closer together. That's the biggest reason of why Real Talks was started. You know, the subjects of police brutality aren't going to be the only subjects on Real Talks. But as AJ was saying, how can we talk about various number of different topics and come closer together, even with the differing perspectives? And so I wanted to really just talk to you about a little bit about those different perspectives, and asking you a question of how do you relate to a culture that's different than your own, and how do you interact in and outside a uniform where culture is different than your own?
Oh, absolutely. So first thing I do is I have to realize where I come from a place of privilege, a place of whiteness, so to speak, and recognize that when I was growing up, the police were always the good guys. The police were always the people that I could run to, not run away from. And I have to recognize when I'm in uniform in my patrol car, that's not the case for everybody. And I am seen as somebody who might take dad away from that 6-year-old because he has warrants, or somebody who might break up a domestic incident, or even worse, as we've seen with the some of the videos of police brutality, situations we don't want to put ourselves in. So the way I relate is always remember where I'm coming from, where I'm at. I spoke to somebody on the street up in Castle Point, and he said, "Hey, you work here, but I live here. You're going to go away and you're going to go home, and I'm not going anywhere. It's going to be my neighborhood." So I have to recognize that. But the way I try to relate is, it is mostly through my travels. I go overseas a lot. I go to Japan, Thailand, Scotland. We're going to Egypt. Everywhere I can go to make myself uncomfortable, not speak the language, not know the culture. When I was in Japan, my tattoos got me kicked out of swimming pools. I cannot go in a public swimming pool because I simply have tattoos. It's that kind of thing that puts me out of my comfort zone, that makes me respect other people's points of view and say, okay, I need to step back from where I come from and try to learn where they're coming from.
That's huge. A big thing that stood out to me in what you just said was that stepping out of your comfort zone. You know, and that's a tough thing to do, and I think that that's a thing that we struggle with right now, and that what we're seeing and why we're seeing that a lot of times people aren't so much as apt to want to seek growth in their perspectives and opinions and thoughts, but they really just are there for the argument half the time, you know.
Oh yeah.
And so yeah, it's very important to step out that comfort zone. What do you think stepping out that comfort zone in your travels even has taught you about your police work?
You just have to respect other people's points of view. You have to understand other cultures. Give you an example. If you're at a Thailand a Buddhist temple, can't wear shoes. You cannot talk. You go in to meditate and pray, and that's about it. And as a Westerner, going in and being approached by that is just it was shocking to me. It was like, oh, okay, I need to step back from where I come from and respect where they're coming from. And I can use that in every aspect. If you go down South County and hit the Bosnian population, you go to the 2nd Precinct and find a lot of Latino population, different customs, different cultures. Don't be afraid of, but try to learn from and see their perspective and see where they're coming from, and just help them help you, and things are going to get a lot better.
Yeah. And I like your recognition of the different populations in different areas.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, what, when it comes down to respecting those other cultures, sometimes inherent biases can make that tough.
Oh yeah.
What are your thoughts on biases, and what biases do you think is often brought in police work that you may see?
So the thing that bugs me the most was when people deny there's bias. Because if you're going to deny there's bias, then I'm going to say the Cubs are as good as the Cardinals. And I'm going to get in a fight in St. Louis because, there's no way the Cardinals are worse or is equal to the Cubs. So I can prove bias real easy. I can say, okay, the Rams are the greatest football team ever. Oh boy, here we go. So there is bias. Now, we have to understand how bias in cultures work and how I might be biased. I think it was Jesse Jackson that said he was walking down the street and heard footsteps behind him. And he turned around and was relieved to see a white person. Now that's coming from a black man, okay? He admits that bias there, okay? He can do that. That gives me courage that I need to be able to say, okay, just because I see somebody that looks different than me, that acts different from me, be it black, white, Latino, gay, straight, Muslim, Catholic, doesn't matter, okay? I'm going to say, okay, what do I perceive them and how can I negate that when dealing with them? I'm not going to try to speak a different language. I'm not going to say, okay, I've been to Mexico, I can relate to a Mexican guy in the 2nd Precinct. It's not about that. It's about respecting that culture and trying to come to a common ground when you're talking to people.
Yes, sir. With that, and I noticed that you use that the word respect a lot, and I think that's a precursor, and that's a foundation of all of our interactions.
Oh, yeah.
But I think that's a precursor to, if we see that the biases exist, if we see that there's a issue with respect, how do we challenge this, not only in the communities that we're serving, but also how do we challenge this within the realm of police in police work, and even amongst and how do you have to challenge that even amongst your own peers? What are some examples of that?
That's a loaded question. That's a big one right there. So, respect comes with challenges to authority, obviously. So if I come on scene and I have that, I'm the authority, everything I say you have to do, and if you think you're right and you think I'm wrong, I can beat you with a stick until you find out that I'm right. We need to avoid that loss of respect or loss of perceived respect. Because as long as somebody is not presenting a threat, it's not a big deal if they call you a fascist pig or whatever, because they're not mad at you, they're mad at the situation. It's misdirected hostility coming at the police officer. We have to recognize that in the situation and say, okay, I understand you're upset. Let me back off and not take that personal, because that ain't personal towards me. You can call me a cracker every day. I don't care. I'm going to go ahead and see what the basis of that anger is. What is happening within this situation? Address the why to get to the what. If we can address the why are you angry? Why are you upset? What's going on? How can I alleviate that situation? And then that disrespect that I perceive isn't there. And now we're calming things down. Now I'm not escalating the situation and saying, okay, you must do what I say. And then I feel disrespected when he doesn't do that. And then he feels disrespected because I'm ordering him, and things just go up and up. We can't let that escalation go. We have to bring things down and understand that misdirected hostility ain't towards me, it's towards the situation.
Yeah. You know, what you're reminding me of, and what you're saying is a concept that I used to hear a lot when I was doing work in rehabilitation. And I used to rehabilitate juvenile sex offenders and felons. And in that, they used to say a lot, avoid power struggles. Avoid power struggles.
Yep.
You know, because no one's going to win, you know, at the end of the day. And so, you know, with what another concept that you remind me of is trauma-informed care. How effective do you think trauma-informed care can be within police work, and also, I think as a tool maybe even to benefit the officer?
So that kind of, I don't know if you saw in this election, Oregon just legalized possession of all drugs, not just marijuana, of heroin, of cocaine, and all, just end user. If it's personal use, you got a little capsule of heroin, I'm going to identify you as a heroin user and try to get you treatment, right? Okay. So I feel that you need to, I'll give you an example. If we addressed addiction, if we took addiction off the table, everybody who wanted help got help, our burglary numbers would go way down. Our assault numbers would go way down. Our overdoses would obviously go way down. And I bet our murders would go way down. So if we can address that underlying issue of the crime, it would probably just, I mean, numbers are coming down anyway. They have been since the 90s, but it could really, really, really help out as far as all this other stuff going. Trauma-informed care is the same way. If I know somebody, I'll give you a really good example. I was interviewing somebody who was and I didn't know it at the time, she was raped when she was around 12 years old. And my armor came in, he said, hey, I need your gun, let me switch you out so I can clean your gun. So I unholstered, gave him my gun. He put the replacement gun in my holster, and I looked back and the girl's just crying. We were sitting here talking about a stealing report, and she's in tears. I didn't realize she was raped at gunpoint. Had I known that, I would have stepped out the room, taken care of the gun situation, and came back in. But it was such a lackadaisical interaction between me and the armor, because it's something we do every day. We handle guns every day. She gets triggered by that because of what she went through. And that was I mean, how do you ask that question? I would never have known that. But seeing that reaction makes me understand there's a lot of underlying issues a lot of people have that we're not aware of. If we can get informed on that, get that trauma-informed care, we can address the domestic issues, the child abuse issues, all those other issues that we're running into.
Yeah. You know, with that, you know, that knowing about it comes a training piece. Recently, there was, I think, a bill passed that mandated, I think, only about an hour of bias training. What do you think about that? And what do you think would be some good training to implement within police here?
So it's a step in the right direction. It's more than we had before. It's not enough. It's definitely not enough. When we see we had this type of training and some of the older officers coming out saying, oh, they just called me racist for an hour. You missed the point. Okay. You got to understand where the presenter is coming from for you. It's a lot of introspection. You have to say, okay, yeah, I am a white guy. I have been raised in a different situation than a black guy. Okay. I have different points of view on everything that's going on. Doesn't make me bad, but I have to recognize my privilege. If I don't recognize my privilege, we're not going to get anywhere.
Wow. Yeah. How much do you think that privilege sometimes plays out in a lot of these situations that we've seen recently? And what would you say is that direct comparison?
So what situations are you talking about? That would be my question.
A lot of situations that we've seen recently with police brutality.
Gotcha.
From, we've seen Ahmaud Arbery, we've seen Breonna Taylor, we've seen... oh my gosh, don't even start on Ahmaud Arbery, because that situation.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on on privilege and on how policing is done in different communities?
Oh, absolutely. There's a very different way policing work is done, and that's one of the issues we need to address, not on a police level, but on a legislation level. We need our senators and congressmen, and even on the state level, if not federal, to start addressing the fact that white communities are policed differently than black communities, are policed differently than Hispanic communities, are policed differently than Bosnian communities. Yeah. They just are. It's an unfortunate issue that we need to address. We need to get training for. We need to start addressing the fact, okay, I'm a North County kid. I work in North County. I can understand North County a little bit, but you bring somebody from Troy or Eureka or something like that, and you try to put them in the middle of Glasgow Village or Castle Point, that's going to be a culture shock. Yeah. That's if they've never met a black person in their life, and all of a sudden it's 90% African American in the community. We need to address that kind and get them some training.
Alongside the training, there's a phrase that went out that I guess a lot of people were tying to the left, and it was defunding the police. So what do you think about defunding the police, and what should that actually look like? And if you had another word, would you suggest that?
Well, first off, let's break it down, because there's an abolish the police movement and a defund the police movement. Abolish the police movement isn't going to work. We need law and order. But the defund the police movement was ineptly named. It should not be named defund the police. As a police officer, I never want any of my budget going away. Please don't think I'm saying that. I don't take my money away. Don't cut my paycheck, right? But there are so many things we should not go to. If I can take 1/100th of my budget, a little sliver of the full budget of police work, and bring in counselors, bring in therapists, bring in social workers to help out with the biggest caseload, which is what we call EDP, emotionally disturbed people. We should not send an armed stranger to somebody in a mental health crisis. That makes no sense to me. No sense whatsoever. If we take, let's say our budget is $300 million. I don't know what it is, but I'm making up numbers. $300 million budget. Let's take $3 million, give it to some social workers and some therapists, put them in a car specially designed for these types of calls, and have them the responding unit to that person in mental health crisis. They can de-escalate, they can help out, they can get medication, they can get people to St. Mary's or whatever hospital they need to get to. Now, I'm not talking about the violent EDPs, not the people that are in crisis where they're tearing up places with knives and stuff like that, but somebody who calls 911 and says, I'm feeling suicidal, I need some help. We don't send armed strangers to that. We send therapists and social workers to that to get them the help they need. I would be 100% for that if I knew that's how it was going to work. Because then you would be taking a lot of our work off our plate, and we could focus on investigations and crimes and speeding and DWIs and the things that really affect the community in a negative way. We get rid of all those calls for crisis intervention, give it to some therapists and social workers, help them out when the violence hits. I would be 100% for that. But naming it defund the police makes it sound like you're taking out of $300 million, you're taking $299 million of it away from the police and saying, go do your job with no changes. It's just a horribly named movement. Help the police or supplement the police or something to take some of our caseload off and give it to the people who are trained therapists or something like that would be a great idea.
Yeah. In light of what we know about therapy, how much do you think that therapy will also benefit police work
Oh, goodness.
and support police?
Absolutely. So I have a personal story on that one.
Yeah.
I was in crime scene for 8 years, all through Ferguson, all through Stockley, all through absolutely the hardest times in my career. And my job was to not only find the bad stuff, but photograph the bad stuff, look at the photographs of the bad stuff, detail report the bad stuff. And it started getting to me mentally. And I didn't realize it, but it started affecting how I was performing at work, how I was treating my wife, all these other things, right? And so I leaned on our what's called Employee Assistance Program, or EAP. And I called them and I went to therapy and I talked it out and I did what I needed to do to get my head right. It's something that I'm not a prideful person. Pride gets in the way of a lot of stuff. And if you're a prideful person saying, I can tough it out, you're going to run into some issues. You need to be able to have a place where you can talk that out and say, hey man, that's really getting to me. I'll give you a really good example. One of the worst ones I saw was a 12-year-old that committed suicide.
Oh, wow.
Really, really tough situation. My partner, this was when I was just on patrol, my partner next to me was a Catholic priest, gave up the priesthood, became a cop. So I knew I could talk to him and he wouldn't let nothing go. And I pulled up next to him car to car. I said, John, this one's really getting to me. And he looked at me and he said, good. I said, good? What you talking about good? That's not a good thing. He goes, no, it proves you're human. If that didn't get to you, I'd be concerned about you. He said, don't negate that. Don't go home and drink a fifth of Crown Royal or something like that. But know that that is a normal reaction. You're not supposed to see a 12-year-old commit suicide. And then talk it out and get the help you need. And that's one of my inspirations, to be able to actually talk it out to somebody. Because I know if I did the wrong thing, if I went with guns and drugs and beating and alcohol and all that stuff that we all turn to in times of stress, instead it's now yoga, running, biking, talking it out, sense of humor, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, I definitely agree that talking it out, just in therapy in general, and for the community as well, is very needed. And it sounds like what I heard a little bit of from, I guess, that fellow officer that was some accountability.
Oh yeah.
And how much does accountability play in the policing community, and have you been able to hold some of your peers accountable?
So definitely accountability. You have to own your feelings. You have to know when, not only when stuff like that happens, like, okay, this one's messing with me, but you got to also understand when somebody on a call is just starting to hit your buttons just the wrong way. Okay. That's why we usually send 2 or 3 people to each call. You see a traffic stop and you see somebody pull up behind the officer. They're not there because they're going to be searching the car, getting people at a gunpoint, but they're there to protect not only the officer, be the cover officer, but if that officer starts getting a little bit too emotional in the situation, you step in and say, hey, I got this. Let me take care of the rest. And you're working in between. It's kind of the good cop, bad cop idea, but it's more of a intervention between 2 people who are starting to get a little bit too heated. And I've done that numerous times where I'm like, all right, man, take a step back. Let me talk. Let me try. And then that person sees the bad guy going away, and me, who I always bring things down. I always like to talk softer and try to de-escalate the situation. Now they open up to me and tell me, okay, man, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have gotten his face. I shouldn't have said that. I'm just angry at the situation. My wife called because we're arguing or whatever. I love stepping in and being that in between. So we don't. In 17 plus years of police work, I've only been in one altercation where I had to tase somebody. I'd rather talk it out. As long as you don't present a threat. The guy swung on me, so I tased him. I had to protect myself. But short of that, talk it out. No matter how angry or loud you get, we can still talk. That the fact that you look at it like, how can I mediate this? How can I lead this to a positive resolution? Even though I have to do what, I have to enforce and I have to uphold the law and order. You mentioned in the process of that,
and then you were police work for 17 years, and you only had a situation one time where you had to tase someone. That leads me to ask, what would you say is perceived threat, and what does that look like in the process of either choosing to use a taser or choosing to use a gun?
That's fair. That's a good question. So, depends on the person. So, I'll give you an example. I'm 5'11", 200 pounds. I can handle myself. I used to box. I know how to fight. No big deal. But some of these officers are 6'4", 250. Some of them are 5'4", 100 pounds soaking wet. So that's going to be one of your huge indicators, is the size to the person that they're encountering. Okay. If I came up on Leonard Little during his DWI arrest and he wanted to get squirrely, I'm allowed to go to a taser or something bigger faster because he's a large athletic individual versus somebody smaller. I'll give my wife for an example. She's a smaller individual, wouldn't have a problem whatsoever. Now, a verbal threat is a threat. If you told me I'm gonna kill you, I can write that in a report, and all it says is I'm going to kill you. But inflection makes a big difference. Tone makes a big difference. If you're drunk as a skunk and you go, man, I'm gonna kill you, I ain't gonna take that as a threat. But if you're balling up your fist or you're reaching in your pockets and say, I'm gonna kill you, yeah, I'm gonna take that as a different kind of threat. So it really depends on the situation, the person, so many different things that go on as far as that goes. Now, a challenge to authority has to be met with greater force. So if you come at me with fists, I'm not gonna square up on you with fists, okay? I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna tase you. Because you shaking and not being able to handle your muscles, I'm gonna win that fight. Now, if you come at me with a taser, now I have a gun because I have to go above what you're doing, presenting as a threat. You have a knife, I'm going to use a gun. You have a gun, I'm bringing a lot more people with a lot more guns, okay? I am going to win that challenge to authority. That just has to happen as far as that goes. But there's a difference between you challenging my authority as, let's say, you're high on marijuana and you're just yelling and screaming because you're just high on marijuana. That's not a challenge to my authority. I'm not worried about that. No one high on marijuana really ever resists. They just want to eat Cheetos and play Nintendo, right? So I can get that person in custody a lot easier than that meth head tweaking for 3 days who just took apart a lawnmower for no reason, and he's just hyped up and every muscle is tense and he's ready to go. That is a whole different situation. So there's just all kinds of different aspects to every situation.
Yeah. You know, in the back of my mind, and while you were talking about these different situations, I thought about one, and I was trying to bring that you might know. I was trying to recall the guy's name in Georgia that was stopped at the Wendy's.
The DWI one.
The DWI.
Yep.
You know, and I wanted to just pick your brain on that and see there's so many different perspectives that have went out on that. I know as you see, they come up, and you know he is impaired apparently, but then it leads to this scuffle, and then it leads to, you know, him being shot. What do you think about that situation in your honest opinion?
So that was a really tough one, no doubt. And we can sit here and Monday Morning Quarterback all day. We can watch the video in slow motion and say this is how he should not have reacted. But I could do that to Tom Brady, and I still wouldn't know what Tom Brady goes through when he's at the line with the Buccaneers now. So I don't want to judge the officers as far as how they reacted, because they reacted in a very tense situation. The officer was disarmed by the taser. The guy turned around and pointed a weapon like he's going to shoot. We were shooting a taser, but like he's going to shoot. And our training is that use of force at me, I have to escalate above it. So whether I agree with it or not, whether you agree with it or not, he was in the right in that shooting by letter of the law. Now we're just talking about letter of the law. I'm not talking about emotions. I'm not talking about opinions. I'm talking about the guy presented a threat. It was answered by a bigger use of force, and the officer won that confrontation. That's just how the law is written. That's how that situation went down. Whether we agree with it or not, that was a justifiable shooting in the letter of the law as it's written right now.
Yeah. You know, with that, and like you said, the letter of the law, and that's very important.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think about some of, for instance, right now, in some of the laws in Missouri, when it comes down to, you know, how the policing works and how when it's justifiable shootings and when it's not. Do you think that there could possibly be some reform? Do you think that they're where they're supposed to be? And what are your thoughts on it?
So, just because you could doesn't mean you should. Okay, I think that's Jurassic Park. It's a quote from Jurassic Park, the original one.
Yeah.
But just because you're allowed to shoot somebody doesn't mean it's a good idea. So I'll give you an example. I had a call where a 16-year-old was shooting up the neighborhood. He shot a bunch of houses up. We find what car he's in. We pull him over. We get him out of the car. He's with his mom, and he pulls a gun.
Mm.
By letter of the law, I have no problem justifying that shooting. We didn't shoot him.
Mm.
We did not shoot him. One, he didn't present a threat. He threw the gun. Okay? So even though when you're reaching your waistband like this, that's presenting a threat to me because I don't know what's coming out. And when he came out with a gun, that's even a bigger threat. Okay? Right then, 100% justified. But as soon as he started to throw it, now I know he ain't got a weapon. In theory, he might have another one, but in theory, he got rid of his weapon. Now I don't have a threat. I had that small opportunity to shoot him. Obviously, I didn't want to. I don't want to shoot a 16-year-old in front of his mom. That's a bad thing, right? Mm-hmm. We wrestled him down. We tackled him. We arrested him. We got the gun. We proved the case. Everything went great. But just because I could have shot him, it was better that I didn't in that situation. Because you're shooting a 16-year-old in front of mom. He was trying to throw the gun. So now we have the, in theory, unarmed person shot and killed by police officers. It was 3 white officers. The young kid was black. That would have been played out in the media quite a lot. The laws need to be written. I'm not a legal expert. I don't know how to address the issue. But when you're in fear of your life, you're allowed to defend your life. No matter how improbable that fear is, how irrational that fear is. And that's my biggest concern. All I have to do right now is say I'm in fear of my life and I can shoot and kill somebody. And as a officer, I'm given more leeway because of the job I'm in to be able to be found a justified shooting. And that seems really, I have real moral issues with that. That's one of my biggest problems. Now, I don't know how to change that. I'm not a legal scholar, but I'm concerned that that's the level of standard that we have right now. All I have to do is say I'm in fear of my life and I can take that shot. When I think there needs to be a higher standard.
You know, part of that is a law called it's
Stand Your Ground?
No, it's something immunity. Qualified immunity.
Qualified immunity,
yeah. What are your thoughts on that law and how it pertains to?
So it's a tough law. It's a real tough law because if you get rid of qualified immunity, you're going to lose a lot of officers. That's one thing that they rely on, not to do bad things, but to know that if I tase you, I'm not going to get sued civilly just for doing my job. Even if it's legit, even if it's 100%, in the right, especially body cameras and all the stuff we have, we can still, without qualified immunity, you could still sue me. I could lose my house, I can lose my pension and all that if in civil court you prove differently than criminal court. Those are 2 very different courts, right? So that qualified immunity, I don't want it going away. I wouldn't mind it being adjusted because the level of being able to prove that I felt threatened for my life is what concerns me the most. But I don't want, I've only tased 1 guy, so it's not a big deal. But if I tased 2 or 3 people in a weekend, and every single one came at me suing me, even if they're 100% justified, I could lose everything that I've worked for after 17 years of police work. So it's a tough one.
Yeah, it is. It makes me, I was thinking about now, because you did say you traveled as well.
Oh yeah.
And I recall that you did some training abroad. Tell us a little bit about the differences between, I guess your training here in the States and your training abroad. And
so I didn't do any training. I didn't get to do any training, okay. But I did a ride along with London Police Department. That's right. Yeah, it was awesome. So in London Police Department, you can be a cop at 18. You can graduate high school, jump in a patrol car, and go. That's crazy. But their process of training from when you're 18, you're not a driving the car, carrying a gun kind of police officer, right? Because they don't have guns anyway. None of their cops, well, not none, they have a special unit that is, but most of their cops are not armed. They have batons, tasers, that kind of thing, but they don't have guns. And you are basically an assist officer from 18 to 21. You're going through college, you're going through training, you're going through academy, and you're doing what we would equate to ride-alongs, but you have arrest powers at age 18. Eventually, you get more and more and more and more training. You then are able to drive the car. You're able to pursue people. You're able to make the higher arrest, maybe get into that specialized unit. But they have 3 years of full training on the street, in the academy, all that other stuff, before you're even allowed to drive a patrol car, which is awesome. Personal opinion. Their culture is very different. And every culture is very different as far as that goes. But they're not worried about shootings. I asked them what kind of guns they use when they get in that specialized unit, and the guy said, I don't know, black ones. I was like, helpful, thanks. They don't know guns over there, but they know stabbings and they know cuttings and all that stuff. So it's just a different world over there. And that's true in England. That's true in, you go to Thailand, you go to Japan, you go to South America. Everybody is just a little bit different as far as what they do.
Yeah, that's true. As we kind of come close, as we wrap up, a couple questions pertaining to the community and the community's efforts at reform. As we've seen protests, we've seen riots, we've seen looting, we've seen it all. And I just wanted to know, what are your thoughts on the community's efforts, and how can the community seek out the justice that I think it not only deserves, but I think it's actually crying out for?
Oh, absolutely.
And how can it go about that effectively?
Well, a great example of today, you got to vote. You have to vote. Your voice has to be heard, and not just every 4 years for president. We got an election coming up in 2 years. Okay, you need to know who your representative is, your Senate, even the House in Missouri. You need to know these, like Cori Bush. You need to know who Cori Bush is. Okay, who she is, what she doing, who she beats to get her job. Good job, by the way. You need to get involved politically, because that's where the big change is. You can protest all day outside of a police department, but on a level of me enforcing crime, I have very little power when it comes to, if the law is racist, I still have to enforce the law as it's written. We need the law to change. There used to be a time when slavery was legal, and I would have to enforce return enslavement. Now, I morally couldn't do that, but back then that was the moral standard, which is unbelievable. Laws have to change. Laws have to evolve, and they slowly are, but there's a lot further to go. The one thing that bugs me the most, as far as calling rioters and protesters by the same name, is I liken that to police work. Okay, if I don't remember the cop's name, kills George Floyd, people judge my uniform based off what that idiot cop did. Okay, he was in the wrong. He's going to be convicted. I'm okay with that. I don't want to be in that same boat as that bad officer. But if I'm an officer and I see a peaceful protest turn into looting and rioting and burning, I cannot judge the peaceful protest based off the actions of a few idiots doing bad things. Okay, we have to be able to judge each other the same way. Don't treat me like the guy who killed George Floyd. I'm not going to treat good protesters as the ones that broke into a Foot Locker and stole some Jordans. Okay, we need to be able to get on that level where we can have that conversation, and not, oh, you're out to kill George Floyd. No, I'm not. That's not what I'm here for. But I know you're not out here to break into Foot Locker or what have you. So we need to be able to judge each other accordingly. But like they said, content of the character, not the color of the skin. So the computer went to sleep.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's fine. But yeah, and with that, as he said, and defining the differences between, cops are putting in the work in the community and serving the community well, to the difference between protesters and rioters. There are two concepts and two questions I'm gonna ask came up with that. One, what is your thoughts on this definition of blue lives, and then the concept of where blue lives coming from, and what does that ultimately do to police in the community?
So, it's polarization is what it is. It's appropriation of a movement. Okay, there's no such thing as a blue life. I was not born blue. I was not born a police officer. I go home and I can take the uniform off, and I'm just a boring ass white guy, right? Pardon my language. So, as far as a blue life matter versus black life matter, you can't take your blackness off. You're not going to lose that. So when people say Black Lives Matter, they're not saying only Black Lives Matter. And that's why the All Lives Matter movement just drives me up the wall. Because, I mean, Hillary Clinton said it, Trump has, everybody's tried to throw that around. It's like, they're not saying only Black Lives Matter. They're saying Black Lives Matter also, even though they haven't in the past, okay? I have a Black Lives Matter flag in my front yard parked right next to my patrol car. I got no problem making that dichotomy show up because as a blue live, so to speak, I 100% support a peaceful protest for Black Lives Matter or a movement for changing the laws or a voting push to get people who are underrepresented to be represented in the House and the Senate and the presidency and all that. So I don't like the term blue lives. I think cop lives matter. Okay, that's fine. As a police officer, obviously I matter, but that's always been the case. It's always been held to esteem. Norman Rockwell painted pictures of us. Okay? We know police lives matter. That's not an issue. The issue is not all Black lives have always mattered. And we need to change that narrative. We need to make sure that they're equal, if not above, how we treat other people.
Yeah, yeah. And in addition to that, you know, oftentimes, as you said, the minority's voice. This is the minority's voice, the marginalized, you know, and so a lot of times in history, the marginalized, if they're not heard, you know, if they constantly have to fight for something that should, you know, be a part of their citizenship. So, you know, in essence, this creates a lot of turmoil. What are your thoughts in the differences of and where we've seen these riots go and these lootings go? As we know, a lot of it is unlawful, but also what also do we see that the circumstances that create that? What are your thoughts on that?
So my biggest thought is, how bad is a relationship between the community and the government that comes to be? Ferguson being a great example. Whether you think what happened was lawful or not lawful, let's get away from that. Let's get to the point of how bad is the relationship between the community and law enforcement in Ferguson, Missouri, that their first inclination, maybe not first, but at least an inclination, is to burn the place down. You're doing something wrong if that's your community policing. That's not how you police your community. We're supposed to be here to serve and protect. Who are you serving? Who are you protecting is something I heard at just about every peaceful protest, because we aren't out there doing that like we should be. We shouldn't be writing speeding tickets to every single person. Now, don't get me wrong, school zones and other things, yeah, I get that. But if you're pulling over a car because the tail light illuminating their license plate is out, and you're using that as a pre-contextual stop to find the marijuana or the whatever, if it's personal use, who are we protecting in that situation? Okay, if somebody has, and that's why I don't mind marijuana being legalized, or at least decriminalized, because I could go to every Friday night, families that get the 24-pack of Busch beer go home and beat each other up is much worse than the two people that buy the dime bag of weed and go home and smoke it. Because I've never been in a domestic situation where marijuana is involved. I've never been in a bar fight where marijuana is involved.
Yeah.
Well, boy, you get alcohol in people, that's a different story.
Right.
So,
yeah.
I kind of went tangential on that one.
No, but it's real.
Yeah.
You know, as we begin to wrap, I wanted to ask you specifically about right now. There's still a push for justice in Breonna Taylor's situation, and I wanted to ask you a little bit of your thoughts on that specific situation, on that specific shooting. And how do you think the communities that are fighting for justice more for that family, what do you think they can do to seek that justice more?
So just looking at how it was presented and knowing the law like I know. Now, this is a different law than St. Louis. Yeah. So Every state, every city, every county has different laws.
Right,
Okay.
right.
So if we were to bring that to St. Louis County, one, that would never happen. We're not allowed to do what happened there. So we don't have that issue. But the way their laws are written, the way that it was presented, they're not going to get a conviction. That's just not going to happen. Okay. So if we can accept that and learn something from it, we need to vote, and we need to change the laws, and we need to change the people in power that allowed that situation to come about, that allowed those laws to be written that way that they're not going to get a conviction. Okay. That's when the anger needs to turn into activism. You need to get that anger just into, let's vote, let's figure out who caused that, get them out of office, and get the laws written to where something like that never happens again.
Yeah, that's deep. Anger into activism. I like that. I like that.
Thanks.
Well, in closing, my final 3 questions. One, how great of a role, big of a role as Ethical Society for Police has played in serving the community and talking about and talking about these things and just tell us your time with Ethical Society and what they're doing.
So I really enjoy the ESOP because they offer opportunities to better the community outside of just normal police work. As an example, everybody knows Kinloch up in North St. Louis. It's not far from where I live. They had it wasn't led by the Ethical Society. I think it was led by, I forget who it was, one of our legislators that's in the area. And I apologize, I forgot your name because we're friends on Facebook. But I was able to volunteer and spend a whole day Saturday just cleaning up garbage and doing road work and cutting back bushes and stuff like that. And that's volunteer work. That's not, I don't get paid. I don't get comp time or anything like that. I was not in uniform. I was in just normal clothes. But given the opportunity to better the community outside of what I do in police work is what I really strive to do with the ESOP. They do, Brandon McCrary and Shanette Hall, 2 of my favorite officers. They're doing trauma-informed stuff. They're doing candy giveaways. They're doing Halloween stuff. All this other really cool stuff to help the community out. They're going into schools and talking to kids on how to become a police officer because the underrepresented minority population just doesn't go into police work. And we need to change that. We need to get those, seeing that it's a career path. I can become a police officer and help out that community. So ESOP gives you a lot of opportunity to help out the community that I live in because I live up in North County.
Yeah, that's awesome. I just wanted to, also give a special thanks to ESOP because the officers that you all have allowed me to interview have been awesome. And so I guess I want to continue. I have a couple more segments left. But I just wanted to give a special shout out also to Shanette Hall for her role in organizing a lot of the officers that have been on the Candid Conversation and connecting me to AJ. Now, AJ, you also said that you were in talking about ESOP. You did some community service, and I recently noticed that there's been a change in the president. Miss Taylor is retired.
I thought you meant U.S. president.
No. Well, yeah, him too.
That too, yeah.
We're all hype on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so you guys got someone new. Tell me a little bit.
I honestly don't know anything about it yet.
Okay.
I still haven't been to a meeting to address that.
Okay.
So I look forward to learning about who's coming in and what we're doing. But I've heard good things, but this is through people that are in ESOP, so that's pretty easy to do.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Okay, well, I hadn't had an opportunity to meet Miss Taylor, but I heard great things, and so congratulations on your retirement, Miss
Lucky,
Taylor.
yeah.
Lastly, I noticed that you had the Nearest. Tell me a little bit about the mask you got on. A little shameless plug there.
Shameless plug for Uncle Nearest out there. Yeah. So I actually fell in love with the actual flavor of the whiskey before I learned the story. But the story is always big for me as far as what I drink or or anything I do. Uncle Nearest was the slave that was owned by Jack Daniels that taught Jack Daniels how to distill. Mm-hmm. The first ever African-American female lead distiller opened Uncle Nearest, and she puts aside a portion of the profits to send the descendants of Uncle Nearest through college.
Oh wow.
So it's an awesome drink. I just absolutely love. I haven't had the 1820. There's 3 different lines. The first 2 I've had, the 1884 and the 1856, are just amazing. The 1820 I haven't been able to find yet. It's an awesome drink in and of itself, but the story behind it, not only the college idea, but the fact that there's the first ever African American, the first ever female, put it together, the first ever African American female as head distiller of Uncle Nearest. Wow. Absolutely love it.
That's beautiful.
Yep.
And you see how that story comes full circle, to where she's putting the descendants of Uncle Nearest into college. That's beautiful. And so I just wanted to plug that story. That's an excellent story. You came in with the mask. I was like,
oh yeah,
yeah. What's that? But yeah. So I just wanted to thank everyone who is tuning in. Thank you again, Officer AJ, so much for coming on and talking with us, and your honest and candid opinion and the community work that you do. And what's really important now, as we move on, and as we know, we have a new president, and now we're moving into this next new space, this next new place in our journey as a country. I'm hoping that we can have more of these conversations, and it actually be coming from a place of trying to facilitate growth, and not so much as just trying to argue, because as AJ has said earlier, it's about respect. It's about respecting each other's opinions and each other's perspectives. But I think that we have an opportunity as a country now to at least be able to grow closer together, and decrease a lot of the division that we've experienced in the last 4 years. And so I'm hoping, and I'm excited to see what that looks like, and excited to see where that takes us as a country, as a community. And so my name is Gabriel, and my guest has been Officer AJ, and just want to tell you thank you all for tuning in, and until next time, I will be doing a few more of these segments to close out the Candid Conversation with Police, which has been subtitled The Right to Remain Vocal, and move into some other conversations as well, societal issues, of course. So stay tuned for that, and we are out. Thank you. Perfect.
Good?
Yes, we are good.